Valyrian steel has an almost mythical reputation in the Game of Thrones universe. It's the highest quality steel, almost impossible to sharpen to a finer edge than human hair, and yet light enough to be used for swords by women and children. Yet it doesn't rust and degrades very slowly over time compared to any other metal. And unlike dragonglass, which is made from the treacherous dragonglass, a type of obsidian found only in Dorne, there have been several Valyrian steel weapons recovered from the ruins of Valyria itself. So if this stuff is so incredible, why don't more people make it? And how did the secret get lost? Let's explore. This is the Blade of Legend. Now we don't know a ton about Valyrian steel or how it's made, but what we do know suggests that it was forged by an incredibly advanced civilization, using techniques that are at least partly lost to history. The continent of Essos had many powerful empires before the arrival of the Valyrians, but no empire was able to project its power across the narrow sea and conquer the other continents until the Valyrians came along. And dragon lore is intrinsically linked to the rise of Valyria. We know they had dragons because the dragon egg that hatched Dragon was purchased from a Valyrian slave who got it from somewhere further east. But dragons weren't the only thing that set them apart. Their mastery of metallurgy was unparalleled. They produced steel that was sharper than any other steel, strong enough to pierce even dragonhide, and yet lighter than any other steel as well. It wasn't just their methods that were advanced. They had access to resources that others didn't. Or mined in the mountains of the Shadowlands contained magic that amplified the power of the dragons, enabling them to grow larger and live longer than any other dragon breed. And all this was accomplished around 2,000 years before the events of Game of Thrones. And yet somehow this metallurgical knowledge was lost by the time of the series, leaving us with only a handful of blades and no idea how they were made. So let us try to figure out how they made this amazing steel, and how the knowledge of that process was lost. What did the Valyrians have access to that we don't? Well, we know that the production of Valyrian steel required a huge amount of heat. The normal furnaces of medieval blacksmiths just wouldn't cut it. You needed a heat source hotter than anything that existed in Westeros. There were volcanoes near Volantis, but those aren't hot enough either. Even modern metallurgists trying to recreate Valyrian steel in the modern day need something like a plasma torch to get the necessary temperatures. That would definitely have helped, but I don't think that's the whole story. After all, even the hottest fire in the world can't create a sword on its own. You still need special ingredients. I'm sure we'd all agree that the most exotic-sounding material is dragonfire. In fact, in canon, dragonfire is explicitly mentioned as playing a part in the creation of Valyrian steel. But is it really so special? Wouldn't any fire produce the same results if it was hot enough? Well, yes and no. You see, while it's true that dragonfire is hot enough to meet the minimum requirements, I think we have to take a closer look at what exactly dragonfire is. Now, since dragons have actually been seen alive in the world of ice and fire for over 150 years, we don't know much about them, but they clearly aren't just big lizards. While they may not be able to breathe literally underwater, I don't think it's much of a stretch to suggest that they could hold their breath for quite a long time, and yet they can swim in the water without drowning. So I think we can safely assume that dragons share some biological similarities with fish. Fish are able to stay underwater because their gills extract oxygen from the water and allow them to breathe. But where does that oxygen come from? Ultimately, it comes from the air. The water therein must have originally come from the sky via rain, snow, or some other form of precipitation. So the surface of every body of water is slightly above ambient air pressure. If the fish gill acts as a sort of bellows, drawing air into its body, then this difference in pressure allows oxygen to flow through the gill and into the bloodstream. By this logic, if dragons had gills of some kind, perhaps internal gills hidden beneath their scales, then their ability to breathe underwater might not have anything to do with fire at all. What if dragonfire is just burnt oxygen? Well, this isn't just a random guess. Remember the slave from Valyria who sold Joffrey his dragon egg? He said this himself. Dragonfire can burn a man as easily as wildfire, yet it cannot boil water. The water on Aegon's Landing burned away as if by magic when Balerion flew overhead. When Vivager fought the Battle of the Four Kings near Harrenhal, her dragon Meraxes burned so brightly that she scorched all the wood on the Isle of Skye, and the fish in the Trident River fell dead into the river. According to Archmaester Elliston, his records indicated that Balerion killed 4,000 men in battle, 7,000 by smoke and poison, and 6,000 drowned, when his victims fell into bodies of water while fleeing him. Sounds like dragonfire is both a fire and not a fire. How does that make sense? Well, fire itself is just burning, the rapid oxidation of organic material fueled by heat. Oxygen is highly reactive and will bind to almost everything. Given a high enough temperature, it will combine with metals like iron to form rust. But a sufficiently strong metal won't rust, even at very high temperatures. And by sufficiently strong, I mean literally the strongest metal in existence, which also happens to be one of the lightest, a metal that can exist in temperatures hotter than the sun. And that's pure speculative fiction. Okay, maybe you can't blow me out of the water with this carbon fiber bike helmet. Fair enough, but that stuff doesn't melt until nearly 2,500 degrees Celsius. Okay, but if dragon fire is just regular fire, then why couldn't the Valyrians just use a normal furnace? Why did they need a dragon? Well, while ordinary fire may technically be hot enough, I doubt it has the same effect on molecules as burnt oxygen. That's like asking why a car can run on regular gasoline instead of rocket fuel. It'll get you where you want to go, but you probably won't get there nearly as fast. Maybe the extra heat from the dragon fire changes the molecular structure of the steel in some way that makes it stronger, harder, and more flexible. Whatever the case may be, the Valyrians had mastered the art of creating steel so sharp that it could cut dragonhide, but the steel itself didn't seem to degrade when exposed to dragonfire, which is why I think the effect of dragonfire on the composition of the steel itself is so important. Whatever else the Valyrians added to their steelmaking process, the effect of the dragonfire on the metal was an essential part of creating Valyrian steel. Now, thanks to the cataclysmic Valyrian doom, the secret of making Valyrian steel was lost. Was this a sudden development or a slow decline? That's hard to say. Almost all of Valyria's metallurgical knowledge was lost after the doom. No pre-doom artifacts have ever been discovered outside of Valyria itself, but the few families who survived and resettled in other parts of Essos attempted to forge new Valyrian steel after the doom, and they failed. Perhaps the process was forever broken by the cataclysm, or perhaps they simply didn't have access to the same resources as their ancestors did. Some theorize that dragonfire alone is not enough, and that dragon blood must also be present in the steel to make it properly. So maybe certain aspects of Valyrian steel were intrinsically tied to the land of Valyria itself. Until they reclaimed their homeland, they could never hope to fully replicate their ancestral craft. But even after centuries, they still hadn't figured it out. So what led to the downfall of the greatest empire in history? According to Samuel Tarley, there were three major causes. The first was the overuse of magic, the second was overconfidence, and the third was hubris. Magic. Interesting choice of words. Magic is a pretty vague term when applied to this world. To some, it may sound like Valyria's overuse of blood magic or summoning dark powers brought about their doom. But remember, this is coming from the omniscient narrator. We don't actually know what happened to Valyria. However, if the Valyrians used a lot of magical incantations as part of their steelmaking process, then that could explain why only the superpowered Valyrians were able to make the stuff in the first place. In the world of ice and fire, however, there are still a few people who keep the memory of Valyrian steel alive. Master smiths like Tobo Mott are able to repair existing blades, but none have ever managed to forge a new one. There are theories that Valyrian steel will eventually be recreated by combining ancient texts with modern materials, science, and that's not totally far-fetched. But what do you think? Is there anything we missed? Do you have a different theory on how Valyrian steel was made? Let us know your thoughts. Could modern science ever hope to unlock the secrets of Valyrian steel? And should it be unlocked, is some ancient knowledge better off lost? As always, thanks for watching.